everyone. I'm Elise Thompson-Richards, Editor-in-Chief of Food Engineering. In this interview, I'm chatting with Halak Mehta, Reliability Engineer for Sapporo-Stone Brewing, in recognition of International Women in Engineering Day. Mehta covers her experience in the food industry, the importance of taking on high-stakes projects, and developing a growth mindset. Let's get into it. Hello, Halak. Thanks so much for joining me.
Of course, I'm very happy to be here.
And so I'd love to begin by getting to know you a little bit. What drew you to engineering in the STEM field?
Sure. So I actually come from a family of engineers. My parents are both electronics engineers, and I was always interested in the sciences, particularly chemistry. I absolutely loved organic chemistry, and I knew from a young age that I wanted to go into one of the STEM fields. When I was in my sophomore year of high school, I met someone who was a sensory scientist for an ice cream company. And all I heard was there is a job that exists where you get paid to eat ice cream all day. And I was like, okay, what do I have to do to get your job? And that's when I learned about food science as a degree for the first time. And when I was then, in my senior year of high school, I was debating between pursuing chemistry, chemical engineering, or food science. And the applied part of chemical engineering was really like more appealing to me. And I felt that, it would be much more versatile than food science. And it was more applied than chemistry. So I decided to go for chemical engineering and thought that if I still liked food science after 4 years, I would pivot to that. And I did, and I ended up getting a master's and a PhD in food science.
Wow, that's incredible. And so, of course, everyone loves ice cream. That's a great driver
Yeah.
for wanting to get into the food industry. But now that you've been in the food industry for a while, what has really drawn you to it and kept you here?
Yeah, I think ice cream, of course. Like I mentioned, I have a huge sweet tooth. I'm sure that's apparent. But no, jokes aside, I think there is this idea that, with food, you can really impact people's lives directly, like a process or a product that you contribute to, can directly go on people's plates. And, food is so versatile. It shapes so many aspects of our life. It's culture, it's memories of your grandma, it's that great beer that you had with a best friend. But it's also engineering and risk assessment and maintenance plans, right? And I think it's this idea that it's this amalgamation of engineering, science, and still fun, that is what's really exciting to me.
So you have a pretty extensive education background going all the way up to a doctorate. How would you describe your educational experience? What was your class makeup like?
Yep. So I think I loved chemical engineering, right? And like my overall educational experience as well. During undergrad, I did explore other industries too, because like I said, I was trying to decide, in the 4 years that, hey, is food science the thing for me? I went to like the petroleum industry. I did some internships in like fertilizers and other chemicals, and even, had some plant visits for perfumeries and like the fragrance sector, but did not like any of it. And the summer before my senior year, I actually interned at a dairy. So it was one of the largest dairy manufacturers in India, and that's where like I got to see the breadth of the food industry. They were making butter, they were making milk, of course, they were making cream, they were making chocolates, and they were even making ice cream. I learned about the quality control and the continuous improvement methodologies aspect of it. Ultimately, I spent a large portion of my internship in the wastewater plant, and we were working on optimizing anaerobic digestion. So, some government regulations had recently changed, and they were trying to adapt to that change. So, I smelled like wastewater for nearly 3 months and worked in 110 degrees heat, but I felt like it was the most wonderful time. So I thought, okay, so food science, sure. I think we have decided I have enough data to conclude that I like food science. That made me decide to go to grad school. And it was again, I wanted to do more manufacturing. I wanted that chemical engineering focus, but now specifically for food. So I moved to the US to pursue a master's in food science from Purdue, and of course, got to work on some incredible projects along the way. I then decided to continue on for a PhD, where, of course, in addition to research and developing more academic depth, I had the opportunity to commission a multi-million dollar production line and train FDA inspectors in making and work with other industry partners for scaling up their recipes. So it has been incredible. In terms of class makeup, I think my undergrad class had about 25% women, which was still a high. Definitely, we were one of those batches where there were more women, than in the past. So, of course, chemical engineering remains a male-dominated field. I do think that the ratio has improved in recent years, but definitely, there's definitely some preconceived notions about women in engineering, and particularly in fields like mechanical and chemical engineering. So I've had to kind of become comfortable with being the only woman in the room, and I think that that's an experience that a lot of women in this industry can relate to.
Definitely, I've of course had the pleasure of speaking to many talented and brilliant women engineers over the years, and they've said a lot of the same things that you've said. But I wanted to backtrack a little bit and talk about some of the projects that you mentioned. Sound like there was some, really cool ones that you've been a part of. Is there one in particular that you'd really like to highlight?
Sure. So in my time at Purdue, in addition to research, like I mentioned, I also got to work on installing and commissioning a new extrusion line. So we have a pilot plant space that was predominantly designed for, teaching and research. But the ask was we need to retrofit it to an FDA compliant production ready facility, right? And so I had the opportunity to work on it from day one, from taking the plastic off of the new equipment all the way to producing consumption ready samples. So it was definitely a huge lift, but it just there were so many aspects that I learned there that shaped me into who I am now. So, some days we were tackling problems like the wall surface was too rough and that was causing some bacterial harborage in that area. Other days I was training operators and supervisors on how to safely dismantle the powder feeders. I learned about developing validation roadmaps and analyzing microbial samples and how do we gather enough data to show that this is safe for consumers. I had to write SOPs for operating and maintaining the extruder. And then, of course, much later in the process, also look at process design, right? How do we streamline? How do we optimize? What kind of textures are we looking at for this plant-based? The main product was a plant-based meat. And so what kind of textures are we looking for? How do we optimize the process for it, right? I had to other days look at finding the right chemicals for optimal sanitation. And, whenever we developed our environmental monitoring programs, we were looking at some swabs and we were not so happy with where we had landed in terms of cleanliness. So it was a great experience, definitely challenging, but yeah, it was incredibly fulfilling as well. At Purdue, I also worked with the Food Entrepreneurship and Manufacturing Institute. So, as a part of that, we have yearly workshops to train industry professionals in aseptic processing and aseptic validation. We also train FDA inspectors in the making. I had to talk about pumps and valves and heat exchangers and different parts. And if they went to a food manufacturing facility as an inspector, what kind of considerations should you have? What parts do you want to look at? What are some difficult to reach areas in certain equipment? Where you could have, some potential risk for to the food safety. So it was incredible. Of course, in addition to developing research, writing publications, writing grants, it was wonderful. And everything that I have learned there has helped me with my current job, which is my role as a reliability engineer at Sapporo-Stone Brewing. So here I work on how do we make sure that we have the least downtime for our production lines. We have bottle lines, can lines, and keg lines. So how do we make sure that the equipment is maintained correctly? We have root cause analyses and failure analyses when things do go wrong, and how can we prevent such occurrences in the future? And how do we overall pioneer a reliability centered maintenance approach?
And was there a learning curve at all for you moving from your previous projects into the beverage industry?
Yeah, I think, I when I was in grad school, I had done some internships, which were on the aseptically processed beverages. So I worked with cold brew coffee, some hot teas, and it was still a bit of a pivot to, the alcoholic industry because the rules and regulations could look different. But I think that's the main part that, I have learned that what are leveraging my transferable skills and what I do know about food processing and optimization, and then learning more about like each product portfolio, right? And even learning more about each equipment. I love saying that each equipment has its own personality, and like you have to learn its quirks in order to be able to work with it. So whether it's a bottle filler or whether it's a control cabinet, there's always something funky about it, and you would do well to learn more about it.
That's an interesting perspective. I've never heard that, but I'm sure you're absolutely right. And so given this wide breadth of experience that you've had across the food industry, how do you see the industry changing over the next decade in terms of both workforce development, but also technological advancements?
Yeah, I think we are at a very interesting juncture in the history of the world. I think that there are, the way I see it, four major drivers that will shape the industry in the next decade. So I think there is Gen Z and Gen Alpha, our consumers, climate change, GLP-1, and AI. And I want to talk a little bit more about each of these. So, like Gen Z and Gen Alpha have very different consumer preferences than the generations that came before them, right? We're looking much more for functionality from each product. We're looking at probiotic sodas, or we are seeing a rise in the demand for non-alcoholic but adaptogenic type of beverages. We are seeing that a lot more like purchasing decisions are driven by what is popular on social today, right? And then we have the GLP-1 trend where we see, how do we approach appetite? How do we approach satiety? What do we even mean by those things, right? I think there's also that macronutrient moment. Protein has had the spotlight for a long time, and I think it will continue doing so. But I do think that we are on the verge of fiber emerging as our next big thing. We're realizing more and more the importance of dietary fiber and even the lack of it in our daily diets. So I think that's the GLP-1 driver. Climate change, just upending supply chains left, right, and center the way as we know it. And how do we make sure that our growth and our harvest, and especially for some products more than others, how do we adapt and how do we make supply chains climate resilient? And of course, then there is AI, right? So I think we have a huge opportunity to address some of these challenges using AI. Whether we want to accelerate new product development, whether we want to think about like food safety, or even like climate change, can we use AI to help us develop those solutions? I think we're at a very pivotal inflection point, and there is some great opportunities and innovation that are going to come out at the nexus of food and AI. In my own work, for example, I am thinking about how AI models can accelerate failure analysis for equipment, or can it help us with developing more predictive maintenance models, right? We know that one of the best applications of AI is pattern recognition. So, can we use that for predicting when this pump is going to fail or when this heat exchanger is going to stop being optimal in its heat transfer? So on that same note, I think, we need to prepare the workforce for this digital transformation that's happening, right? We have more cloud-based technologies. We have a lot of data that we could gain some great insight from if we start speaking the AI language. Now, I don't think that we can all become computer scientists overnight. I know I can't for sure. But just being aware and kind of thinking about how we can bridge that gap, I think would take us a long way in, especially since we will have a lot of expertise in AI and we already have a lot of expertise in manufacturing.
Definitely. And of course, AI and how it can be applied to manufacturing is one of the things that we talk about all the time on food engineering. So I'm really glad that you brought it up. But as far
Hmm.
as these product development trends like GLP-1s and climate
Hmm.
change and even, shifting of focus on consumer generations, are you
Hmm.
seeing manufacturers shifting how they build processes to adapt to these trends?
I think so. Yeah. I am definitely seeing, like, I can speak more to like the beverages trend now. And I'm definitely seeing that, particularly because alcohol consumption is going down, right? So we're trying to come up with newer ways and newer products where we can deliver maybe more non-alcoholic options. Or even if, we're looking at, is there overlap between beer drinkers versus, say, non-beer drinkers? Are they willing to cross over into different categories? And I think that's the same thing with GLP-1 and other trends as well. We're looking at what do the products of the future look like, right? What is it that people want to eat? And I think that very definition of consumer demand is going to change.
And so going back to this idea of workforce development, I'm curious, in your experience, of course, being in what's considered a male-dominated field, how can the industry better support diversity and equity in hiring?
Yeah, I think that trend is slowly shifting. I think we are seeing, more research. We're seeing more trends about, there's a lot of data, right, that a diverse workforce is better in terms of your business outcomes, in terms of performance, in terms of employee morale. And I think that we are seeing a lot of, at my current workplace, for example, we have some great resources. We have an internal resource group. We That's called the Women's Impact Network, that helps with setting up leadership seminars and professional development opportunities, and addressing things like invisible labor that women do in the workplace. And just acknowledging that these things exist is, I think, a great first step. Like, I am so happy that, yes, that the workplace is acknowledging that there is something that we need to do here, right? And we celebrate International Women's Day with an all-women brew. So we pick a flavor each year and we brew a special beer. And it's so this year, for example, we did a yuzu white tea flavored IPA. And it turned out great. So we have a small pilot facility where we did all the brewing, we learned more and observed the process more closely. So it's things like that, which I think, just acknowledging that the diverse opinions and diverse lived experiences are valid, and helping with such kind of initiatives, I think is really helpful in the first place. And I think also just seeing women leaders, our senior director of ops is a woman, and I am just so happy to see her in that position. At Purdue, the department head of the food science department is a woman, and she is now also an associate dean. And it's just inspirational to see women in those positions of power and encourage the women who come after them.
Absolutely. That's so inspirational just to hear you say that now.
Mhm.
Um, you mentioned, of course, seeing these women in positions of leadership and maybe even looking up to them. Um, with that in mind, have you, benefited at all from having a mentor throughout your career?
Yes, for sure. I was actually listening to one of the food engineering interviews from last year, and she talked about mentors and advocates. And, I have had the good fortune of having both. And, even my boss at Purdue and the director of the Food Entrepreneurship and Manufacturing Institute, he has been such a big supporter, and he has really been pivotal in, making me who I am today. And he always encouraged me. He always, gave me some big decisions, threw me sometimes into the deep end of the pool, but believed that I could swim. And, it helped me believe that, okay, I am entrusted with all of this decision making, but I can do this. I have what it takes. And he acknowledged that, it's a male dominated field, but even as a first year's master student, he would ask me questions like, if you were heading this plant, how would you make sure that these risks were lowered, or how would you decide this? Or if you were, the engineering lead on this project, how would you go about doing that, right? And so he always encouraged me to think like a leader, and I think that's what helps you. That okay, yes, you belong here, right? And that's a question that we often ask ourselves with imposter syndrome and with just okay, do I deserve to be here? Do I have what it takes? And likewise, even the department head at Purdue that I mentioned, she has been incredibly encouraging. And just setting a good example, right? I have also had the good fortune of being involved with these other professional organizations. So in the US, particularly, I've been a part of the Institute of Food Technologists and Phi Tau Sigma. And through both of these, Phi Tau Sigma, by the way, I'm sure you know, but it's the only honor society of food science and technology. And so it's been great to be involved in formal mentorship programs through those organizations as well. I've also been involved in the American Institute of Chemical Engineers since a long time, and even they have some great programs. So I think, both formal mentoring and informal mentoring and having advocates in all the workplaces that I've been in has been amazing for me. And I'm very, very fortunate to have that.
Wow, that is incredible. And I love what you said about thinking like a leader. I think that's such
Mhm.
great advice across industries. But building on that, what advice would you have for women or anybody looking to get into engineering or the food industry?
Yeah, I think my first advice is, have a growth mindset and be willing to get uncomfortable. I think being teachable and adaptable goes a long way. And growth could look like different things at different stages in your career, right? Sometimes it's a graduate program, sometimes it may be upskilling with a certification, sometimes maybe it's picking up an AI tool or even picking up a new hobby, right? But just believing that you can learn quickly and add value to something completely new, I think that's really important. Do not hesitate to be ambitious, make bold moves, and definitely do not self reject. I think if you are the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. So I think that's an important thing that we have to think about. I think the other advice that I got and that I have followed is to have a people-centered approach. At the end of the day, we all have to work with other human beings, and making sure that the team that you work with, the people that you mentor or that you are mentored by, um, You want to really care for them, like build genuine relationships, invest in your teams, in your peers, uh, money and titles and all your technical skills, of course, those are important and they're great. But at the end of the day, it's been my experience, at least, that it's the people who carry you and it's the people who matter on a daily basis as well. And, try to create development opportunities for everyone. If the people who came before us have worked hard to make it a little bit easier for us, so I think we owe it to pay it forward. And I really try to center this in my career as well. And I think about, okay, how do I give back, right? At my undergrad university, I had the good fortune of being the founder and president of the first American Institute of Chemical Engineers chapter. And AICHE had not even heard about the college I was in because, and none of my peers knew about professional organizations like that. So I had to initially send in some documentation saying, hey, we are a real college, we exist, we do have a chemical engineering program. And I had to negotiate with the department to pay for some of the initial memberships because $50 is a lot of money in Indian rupees. So, but now that we have had that, we have gone through that, the chapter is still active. We have kids who are participating in different chapter activities now, and even they're collaborating and creating conferences and symposiums with other local chapters. So, just thinking about, okay, this is great, this can create opportunities for some other people. Likewise, at Purdue, I think, now we have a food grade space. And today it's extrusion, but we can use that facility for creating other samples or other products. And of course, it's great learning for the students as well to work in that space, to really put on a PPE and, go for that hand washing station and a foot bath like you would in an industrial plant. So just creating opportunities for yourself, of course, but also for other folks, I think is really, really important and fulfilling.
And so I think you kind of touched on this about, building opportunities for others, but as time goes on, is there anything else that you'd like to see happen, whether through workforce development or in the food industry as a whole?
I think I would like to see more women in leadership roles for sure. I would also like to see more women in engineering and manufacturing floor roles, right? If you go out on the manufacturing floor today, you'll see, of course, a larger percentage of women than you did maybe 20 years ago. But just seeing more presence there, seeing more in maintenance, right? Which is plant maintenance, especially, continues to be even more male dominated than other roles. So just seeing a better gender ratio there, I think would be amazing. I do think that we are on a good trajectory. We can definitely expect to see some improvements. But yeah, we need to do more. And I think I would like to not see headlines anymore that say first woman to do XYZ in organizations ABC years long history. Like no more glass ceilings.
I agree 100%. So, looking at my list here, I think those are all the questions I had for you. Is there anything else that you'd like to add that we didn't already discuss?
No, I don't think so. This was great. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. I really appreciate it, and I hope our readers and our listeners really enjoyed this interview.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.